Nobody remembered her first day. That was the strange part. In a hospital where every new face got a once-over, a whispered question, a raised eyebrow from the veteran nurses who guarded their territory like lionesses, Nurse Elena Marsh had simply appeared one Tuesday morning wearing scrubs one size too big and an ID badge that still smelled like fresh plastic. She clocked in, took her assignment, and disappeared into the rhythm of Riverside General's emergency department as if she had always been there. As if the building itself had absorbed her the way it absorbed everything else. The noise, the fluorescent light, the low hum of machines keeping people tethered to life. Dr. Marcus Hale, the ER's chief attending, barely looked twice at her. He had seen 100 nurses come through those doors over 18 years, some brilliant, most forgettable, a few dangerous in their incompetence. Elena registered as none of these. She was efficient. She was quiet. She followed orders without complaint and never asked for recognition. When Mrs. Alvarez in bed 6 started coding at 2 in the morning, it was Elena who noticed the monitor's rhythm change 4 seconds before the alarm sounded. For seconds that mattered more than anyone in that room would ever know. But even then, when Hale barked out compressions and epinephrine, he credited his own instincts, not the nurse who had already prepped the crash cart before he asked. That was Elena's gift, if you could call it that. Invisibility. She moved through the hospital like water finds the cracks in stone, filling space no one else wanted to fill, doing work no one else wanted to do, and somehow never leaving a mark that anyone thought to examine. The senior nurses, Denise and Priya, occasionally traded looks when Elena did something unusual. The way she splinted a fracture with textbook precision no community college program taught. The way she calmed a screaming child with 3 words spoken so softly only the child seemed to hear them. But the ER was too busy, too loud, too hungry for warm bodies to interrogate a good one. Questions were a luxury the night shift couldn't afford. Denise did ask, once, over vending machine coffee at 3 a.m., where Elena had trained. Overseas, Elena said, and offered nothing more, and something in her tone, not cold but final, like a door closing without a slam, told Denise not to ask again. So she didn't. In a profession built on burnout and short staffing, a competent nurse who didn't complain was not a mystery to be solved. She was a blessing to be used. For 3 weeks, this was Elena's life. 12-hour shifts, granola bars eaten standing up, blood pressure cuffs and 4 lines, and the particular exhaustion that comes from holding other people's pain in your hands all day. She rented a studio apartment 6 blocks from the hospital, furnished with almost nothing. A bed, a lamp, a locked metal box she kept under the floorboard beneath her closet. The kind of detail that would have alarmed anyone who bothered to visit, except no one ever did. She ate alone. She ran at dawn 6 miles, the same 6 miles timed to the second, though no one who saw her jogging past the coffee shop on 5th Street would have thought to wonder why an ER nurse ran like she was still being timed by someone somewhere who mattered. The hospital had its rumors, the way all hospitals do. Ghost stories about the 3rd floor. Legends about a surgeon who vanished mid-residency. Whispers about administration cutting corners on equipment. Elena factored into none of them. She was scenery. She was the hands that changed the dressing. The voice that said, "You're going to be fine," to people who mostly weren't. The shadow at the edge of every trauma bay who left before anyone thought to say thank you. It was a Thursday, unremarkable in every way until it wasn't. When the first sign of something wrong slid quietly across the front desk without anyone noticing its weight. A memo arrived by secure fax from an unlisted federal number, addressed not to the hospital administrator, not to Dr. Hale, not to the chief of surgery, but to a name that made the front desk clerk blink twice before she photocopied it and set it aside, assuming a clerical error. The name on the memo was Elena Marsh. Beneath it, 3 words that meant nothing to the clerk and everything to whoever had typed them. Priority 1. Confirmed. Elena found out about the memo the way she found out about most things. Sideways without asking. A folded paper left in her locker by someone who clearly didn't understand what they were handling. She read it once standing in the nurse's locker room with her back to the door. And for the first time in 3 weeks, something in her face changed. Not fear. Recognition. The look of a person watching a door they thought they'd locked forever begin, slowly, to open. She folded the paper back along its original creases, tucked it into her scrub pocket, and returned to her rounds as if nothing had happened, because that was the only skill that had ever kept her alive. the ability to carry catastrophe in her pocket and kindness in her hands at the very same moment. But something had shifted in the hospital's air. A pressure change too subtle for ordinary people to register. The kind of stillness animals feel before a storm arrives over the horizon. Dr. Hale would later say he felt it too, though he couldn't explain why he'd walked to the window that afternoon and stared at the empty helipad on the roof for almost a full minute, as though some part of him already knew what was coming, already knew that the quiet new nurse folding sheets in bed 12 was about to become the reason for everything. If you're already hooked, hit subscribe now because the helicopter lands, and Elena Marsh's real name finally gets said out loud. Chapter 2: The Landing. The helicopter came in low over the tree line at 4:47 in the afternoon, cutting a shadow across the parking lot before anyone in the ER had time to process the radio call that preceded it. Military Medevac, the dispatcher said, non-standard authorization ETA 4 minutes, and Dr. Hale remembered thinking that sentence didn't make sense. Military birds didn't land at civilian hospitals without weeks of paperwork, without liaison officers, without the kind of bureaucratic friction that made every joint operation between the armed forces and public medicine feel like negotiating a treaty. And yet here it was, rotor wash flattening the ornamental grass by the ambulance bay, engines screaming loud enough to rattle the reinforced glass doors at the hospital's main entrance. Security had barely cleared the doors when the soldiers came through. A dozen of them, rifles slung, boots striking the polished floor in a rhythm that silenced the entire waiting room mid-sentence. Patients froze. A child began to cry. Denise, standing at the nurse's station with a chart in her hand, felt her mouth go dry as the lead soldier, a broad-shouldered man with a scar bisecting one eyebrow, raised his hand in a slow, deliberate salute, not to Dr. Hale, who stood stunned by the crash cart, and not to hospital security, who had gone pale and useless in the doorway, but to someone standing behind them all, half hidden by an 4-pole and a red trauma bag she had been restocking only seconds before the helicopter's engines first became audible. Elena Marsh straightened slowly, one hand still resting on the trauma cart, and for the first time in 3 weeks, every eye in that emergency room turned toward her and actually saw her. Dr. Hale opened his mouth to demand an explanation, the reflex of a man who had run this department for 18 years and answered to no one within these walls, but the words died somewhere in his throat when the soldier spoke first, his voice carrying easily over the retreating whine of the rotors outside. "Colonel Marsh," he said, "Command sends their apologies for the delay. We need you wheels up in 6 minutes." The silence that followed was total. Denise's chart slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a slap that seemed impossibly loud. Somewhere behind the nurse's station, a resident whispered, "Colonel?" Like the word itself was a foreign language. Dr. Hale stared at the woman he had trained for 3 weeks, the quiet one, the invisible one, the nurse who restocked carts and calmed frightened children and never once raised her voice above a murmur, and tried to reconcile her with the rank the soldier had just spoken as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Elena, if that was even her real name, though it turned out later that it was, simply not the whole of it, did not flinch, did not stammer, did not offer the flustered explanation that 30 pairs of eyes were silently demanding. She peeled off her nitrile gloves with the same unhurried precision she used on every task in that hospital, dropped them in the biohazard bin, and looked at Dr. Hale with an expression that was, for the first time, entirely unguarded. "I owe you the truth," she said, "and I don't have time to give you all of it. I've spent the last 11 years running trauma units in places that don't officially exist, doing surgery in tents while people shot at the tent. 3 weeks ago my last team was compromised, and until command finished their investigation, I needed somewhere to disappear. Somewhere ordinary. Somewhere I could still use my hands to help people while I waited to find out if I still had a career, or a life, to go back to." She glanced toward the soldier, then back at Hale. "The investigation's over. They cleared me. And apparently 3 hours ago, 7 of my old unit got pinned down in a location I'm not permitted to name, and I am, according to the United States Army, the only surgeon within reach who has actually operated in that terrain before." Hale realized, distantly, that his hands were shaking, though whether from anger or awe he genuinely could not say. "You've been changing bedpans," he managed, "for 3 weeks. And I'd do it again," Elena said, and there was something almost gentle in the way she said it, an honesty that cut through every ounce of professional armor either of them wore. "Every patient deserves the same hands, doctor. It didn't matter to me whether I was holding pressure on a gunshot wound in the mountains or in 4-line in bed 12. Pain doesn't rank people. I never learned how to either. There was no time for the goodbye the moment seemed to demand. The soldier touched his wrist, tapping an invisible watch, and Elena moved, already stripping out of her civilian scrub top to reveal a compression shirt beneath, already reaching for the black case one of the soldiers extended toward her, a case that clicked open to reveal instruments no ordinary nurse would ever have been trained to recognize, let alone use. She paused only once at the automatic doors, framed by the settling dust of rotor wash and the impossible blue of the sky beyond, and looked back at the room that had sheltered her without ever truly seeing her. "Take care of Mrs. Alvarez's follow-up," she said to Denise, who was still staring, open-mouthed, at the woman she'd shared vending machine coffee with 3 nights earlier. "She's stronger than her chart says." Then she was gone, swallowed by the helicopter's shadow, gone the way she'd arrived, without ceremony, without warning, leaving behind a room full of people who would spend the rest of their careers telling this story and never quite being believed. The helicopter lifted off at 4:53, banking hard over the parking lot before vanishing north, and Dr. Hale stood in the ambulance bay long after the sound had faded, staring at the empty sky, wondering how many other invisible people were walking through his hospital right now, carrying entire lives, entire histories, entire wars behind eyes too quiet to ever give them away.